I did join industry at a relatively early stage of my career. I worked at Wellcome, GlaxoSmithKline, and GlaxoSmithKline. Along the way, I did an MBA, so I did actually learn to do a discounted cash flow at some point, and then started to work for smaller companies. And my first startup was actually a spin-out from an existing organization. It's actually a relatively easy way to do a startup, but that was my first. But I've been involved with a number of much smaller startups since then. And in fact, PsiOxus, which is, as Matt said, is an SR1 investee company, is actually one of the companies where the manufacturing issues failed, and we've managed to rescue. So yes, I've lived through that. But PsiOxus was formed from two companies, two spin-out companies, and I was CEO of both of those companies, and we then merged them into one organization. So starting up a company, it's pretty straightforward. You start off with an idea, you form a team, and you guys have got ideas, and you've started to form a team. You put together a plan, you raise some money, and you execute. It's all pretty straightforward, step by step in terms of the process. The problem is that actually it's not quite that simple. You come up with an idea, you start developing a plan, you find out that that's not going to work, so you have to go back to the idea, you modify the idea, you go back to your plan, you form a team, a new guy comes on board who completely rubbishes both your idea and your plan. You go back and redesign your idea and your plan, and you bring in somebody else who starts the whole process going. Then you bring in investors, and they really start to screw things up. They completely tell you that your idea is rubbish, send you back to the drawing board, and never mind by the time you actually start to execute. So this whole process is complex, and it's really iterative in terms of the way that you're going to pull all of these things together. So in terms of startup, it's not a linear process. It is going to be iterative. You are going to interact with experts, with investors. That's great. Thank you. Sorry. That's my finance director. Theo. We're busy raising money at the moment, so that's probably an important call. I'll pick it up later. This is one of my key messages, is really that it is iterative. Allow it to be iterative. Learn from every part of the process, every part of the step. Even if this idea and this business plan competition doesn't go right, that's part of your iterative learning process of becoming an entrepreneur. As Matt said, failure is part of the process here. Every failure, every mistake, everything that goes wrong, that's an iterative learning process in the way that you're going to learn to be an entrepreneur. It's certainly a journey that you're going to go through. So I'm going to pick up on just a bunch of these things. This is quite a broad topic. How do you start up? Every startup is going to be very, very different. So I'm just going to try and pick up on a few points. And as Matt says, one of the important things to start off with is really this idea. Do you even have a good idea? What is a good idea? And Matt's talked a lot about this. What is this unmet need that you're going to solve? What problem will you solve, and is it a problem that's worth solving? Don't be a technology looking for the problem. You've got to start with that problem and work out what you're going to solve and how you're going to solve it with the technology or the idea that you have. And as Matt says, really think very hard about who's going to buy this idea. Who will the end customers be? There are patients, there are doctors, there are hospitals, there are pharmaceutical companies, there are biotechs. Who is your actual end customer in this process? But even if you're not going to be the company that sells to the end customer, who will actually buy your idea from you? So if you've got a therapeutic and it's going to be a new vaccine or a new cancer treatment, which customer which pharmaceutical company ultimately might buy that idea from you. And you need to understand that whole route of generating value that Matt has talked about. And you really need to understand, why do you think you can do this better than somebody else can do it? You know, what are the key features and benefits of your particular idea? And also, what are the weaknesses? What are the things about your idea that may give you some disadvantages when you take this forward? And a key thing that will always come up is how can you prevent others from doing the same thing as you're doing? So is this an IP issue? Do you have IP? Who has that IP? If you don't have it, how are you going to get hold of it? Or is this IP that you will generate along the way? Sorry, IP, intellectual property, if that's not clear. So, you know, who is going to generate that intellectual property? Where is that going to come from? That's going to stop others doing the thing that you're doing. Or is this just know-how? Is this just that you think you know how to do something better? If it is, then be very, very careful, because it's going to be very difficult to get investors coming in on a know-how idea. You're really going to have to convince them that you can prevent others from doing the same thing. And then the question is, can you make it work? Not just can it work, but can you as a team make this idea work? Clearly, is it feasible? Is it actually feasible to go through all of those steps that Matt laid out in terms of the process? And if it is feasible, how much will it cost? How long will it take? And as Matt has said, as you draw that route map out, are there any early proof of concept points that you can, although there are these value inflection points, these things that you can generate along the way? You know, if it's a medical device, is it a prototype? You know, what are the stages and the gates? What are the stop and go criteria that you're going to work along the way? Map that out, and this is obviously your plan. And as you're doing all of this, ask yourself, what can go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? And the answer is absolutely everything. And as Matt said, this is all about risk. This is highly risky stuff, right? 5% at best. I think that's really generous. 5% of early ideas are going to get to the market. So risk isn't something that you hide. Risk is something that you're doing. This is all about risks. So don't hide the risks. Identify the risks. Build into the plan how you're actually going to manage the risk. Build into everything you do how risk gets managed. How do we minimize that risk? Because as Matt says, if you can minimize that risk, you increase the value. Every time you take risk out, you demonstrate something, you push that valuation and that value up. So it's all about managing risk. And things will go wrong. And everything can go wrong. As Matt said, it can be manufacturing. It can be the clinical trial. It can be in your staffing. It can be in your funding. The life of an entrepreneur is an absolute roller coaster. Every time you achieve something, it's a great high, and it will be followed by a great low. Right? Ups and downs all the time. So you've got to embrace risk. It's all about living and managing with risk. And yes, you will come to understand. You won't see in binary code, but you will look at everything from the point of view of risk. If I can minimize risk, I'm adding value. How do I do that all the time? So that's the ideas. I was asked to talk a little bit about building a team. I think this is probably a meeting entirely on its own. But a good team, first of all, really, really matters. So yes, your idea and your plans are important, but the investors are going to invest in people. They're going to invest in a team. And there's lots of different quotes. This is one I always remember, but when I looked on the internet, I couldn't find who to attribute it to. So maybe I've made it up partly along the way, but always invest in an A-class team with a B-class idea rather than a B-class team with an A-class idea. The idea being that a really good team of individuals are able to take even a mediocre idea and make a success of it, whereas a rubbish team will be able to destroy the best possible idea along the way. So team matters. So spend a lot of time thinking about team. So who's in and who's out? So not all of the inventors or competition team members need to be in the business or stay in the business. You know, some people may want to go on and work in a small company and be entrepreneurial, and others may want to stay in academia and be scientists. You don't have to have everybody in your team. And commitment is really important. If you're going to take this forwards and really turn it into a business, this is at least going to be a 24/7 activity. You have to be really committed to doing these things. And I think it's also important to work out who's the leader. You know, I see a lot of people not addressing this issue, but in my mind, a team without a good leader is rarely likely to be a good team. And if you look around the table and it's not obvious to you who the leader is, maybe the leader's not sitting around the table. Maybe you actually have to go out and find the right person who's actually going to lead the team. Maybe that's an experience gap or a capability gap that you don't have in your current team. And also remember that the leader today almost certainly isn't going to end up being the leader in the future. It does happen. You know, you do get your entrepreneurs who go the whole way and are the startup CEO, and they are the CEO when the company IPOs, you know, a decade later. It happens, but it's not common. And so leadership changes do happen along the way, and you know, I think that has to be something that you think about when you're starting up. And then once you know who's leading, what do the others do? You know, everybody has to have a role around this team, and you know, everybody needs to know what's expected of them as they go forwards. So then work out the gaps. What other roles and skills do you need in your team? If you're all scientists, do you need people with business expertise? You know, work out what those gaps are and work out how to fill them. You may all come from the same sort of discipline. Maybe you need other disciplines. Early on in this sort of startup phase, beg, borrow, and steal the expertise that you need. This isn't about hiring people. This is about networking in this sort of environment. A lot of people will be willing to give you advice and help you out with your plan. Remember that potential investors, advisors, and customers are really important resources. So even though these people might be your future investors, they can give you an awful lot of information and advice along the way. Every time you present to anybody, that's an opportunity to learn. It's free consultancy. Use it. And also your future customers. You know, if you think your future customers, I mentored a team last year whose business proposal was a service business to Big Pharma. They went out during this competition and met with 3 or 4 Big Pharma companies. They got in front of them. They talked to them about what their needs were, and they really understood their market by the time they finished this business plan competition, and they've gone on to be very successful. So balance is important within a team. I think this is an art, and probably something that you learn over time. But you need a balance of skills and personalities and styles. You need the science and the business. You need the extroverts and the introverts. You know, if you're all an introverted group, good luck presenting your plan to investors, right? Somebody's got to stand up and do the pitch and do the whole thing. You know, preferably somebody who doesn't talk to their own shoes while they're doing it. You need the visionary people with the big picture, but you need the people that are going to focus in on the detail. You need what are often called starters and finishers, or starters and completers, right? Some people can just set activities going. They're great at setting activities going, but they're really rubbish at actually getting that task finished. You need both of those. You need the thinkers and the doers. So think about the balance within your team and consider how that's going to work. But remember, in a startup, everybody must be willing to do everything. It is going to be an all hands to the pump activity. You know, somebody has to take out the trash, and in a startup, that's probably the CEO. So, you know, you have to be willing to do everything within a startup organization. And ask yourself, can you enjoy working effectively together long term? Remember that this project is going to change, the company is going to change, and the people are going to change. So think about the future right at the start. And I think this is where it's important to really address a few hard issues early on and be frank within the team. As I say, agree who will do what. So who is going to take out the trash? Who's going to have the various you know, tough jobs within what you're doing? But also agree who will get what. So deal with these founding equity issues at a relatively early stage. I'm not necessarily saying now during the business plan week, but make sure early on you've got agreement within the team about your founding equity. Contracts are there for when things go wrong, right? You're all friends now. Everybody likes each other. You go out for a drink, and you know what could possibly go wrong. The reason contracts are there is to cover off what happens when things do go wrong. So what will happen if one of your team, you set up this company, there's 3 of you, you agree that it's really fair to split it 3 ways. What happens if one of those people leaves at the end of the first year? Do they keep a third of the company and the other 2 do all of the work? You know, and what are you going to do if that's a good leaver? In other words, everybody agrees that it's really the best thing that Joe leaves because, frankly, he's not going to cut it, and he doesn't want to cut it, and everybody agrees he should leave. Or Joe just says, you know what, I can't be asked, I'm just leaving. You guys create the value, and I'll just keep my 30%. And it happens. So think about it, deal with it, come to some sort of agreement, and you're best off finding a way to get that documented if possible. So you've got a great idea, you've got a great team. What do you do next? I was asked to cover dealing with tech transfer offices because a lot of these business plans come out of universities. I've had some dealings with tech transfer offices. I've worked with 3 different tech transfer offices, but I decided to look on the internet to see what other advice was there. And I found 2 presentations saying what I hate about tech transfer offices. Couldn't find anything else, so 2 presentations on what I hate about tech transfer offices. Maybe a bit harsh, but I think for me, the key thing here is that there's a wide range of capabilities and approaches in tech transfer offices. I think they're very, very different across different universities. I think all of them can be difficult to deal with, but you will see a really wide range of expertise, experience, realism, real differences in terms of what they can actually offer you, both in terms of cash and people and contacts. I mean, I've been dealing with one of the teams here, and I think that the tech transfer office that team is dealing with has a completely unrealistic view of the way in which the technology should be developed. I've told the team I think they need to go back and negotiate, and they've said, well, you know, this is what the tech... You have to be able to negotiate with a tech transfer office. They might, you know, they may not be right, but you do have to get to know your own tech transfer office their reputation, their preferences, and their working style. And you are going to have to work with the tech transfer office if that's where the IP is coming from. So engage with them early on, work out what IP is available and what IP is not available. Are they interested in starting up companies, or are they interested in licensing that technology out to larger companies? And as I say, negotiate when necessary. They're not necessarily right. And if you put a good argument and a good business case together, you may well be able to change their mind in terms of what they do. But you have to be prepared, and you have to negotiate with them from a sensible point of view. A spin-out is not necessarily the best thing to do, particularly early on. So is this actually a company? Does it make sense to form this as a company? Or is it just a project? Is it something that should get grant funding and be taken forwards as a project? Or does it really justify forming a company? And remember that early on, as Matt says, it can be difficult getting funding, and I'll talk about that in a little while. But early on, you probably have more resources within the university than you could hope to get by spinning yourself out and relying on investment from elsewhere. So leverage the resources that you have, both in terms of lab space and all of the academic support that you have. So deciding when to spin out is a key strategic issue. So if you do need to negotiate the IP, remember that a bad license, again, in the same way that a bad team will kill a good idea, a bad license will kill a good idea as well. Don't assume that your tech transfer office has the right idea of what the valuation should be, or the milestones, or the royalties. You are going to have to negotiate with them. It's possible that you might need some sort of letter of intent with the tech transfer office. So you're caught in a catch-22. Your tech transfer office won't give you the license for the IP unless you have the funding, but the investors certainly won't give you the funding unless you have the IP. So a letter of intent can be a means of getting through that. Make sure you've got the right exclusivity. So in other words, the agreement says that while you're off trying to raise money, the university can't go off and sell the IP to somebody else. And make sure that you've given yourself long enough option period within that. So, for example, the university says, we won't license the technology to anybody else within these fields for at least 6 months. So that gives you the time to go off and get your funding in place and then come back and execute a full license. When you do execute the full license, make sure that the license you execute is relevant to the business plan that you've put together. Make sure that you've got the IP that you need. So, you know, I've seen a case recently where, you know, it's a company around forming a vaccine company around a particular technology, but the tech transfer office is only willing to give licenses for one particular disease. So you can't form a vaccine company where your technology license only covers a single disease area. And make sure that the territories are enough. You know, if you're developing a therapeutic product, you're going to need global licenses, not just a license to the UK. And I've seen people try to do that as well. And being far too parochial in terms of just looking at the UK market. When we're talking about life science, it's a global marketplace. And make sure that the royalty rates are milestones. So, you know, the structure of this license will be that the university will get milestone payments at various points along the development path, and then they will take some form of a royalty rate, you know, a percentage of sales at the end. But make sure that that structure, that commercial structure, doesn't kill your idea. You know, Matt's run through why the valuation is low early on, but some of the tech transfer officers still don't understand that key concept. You know, they think they've got $1 billion product, and therefore, you know, these milestones and these royalty rates are huge. Remember, you've got to persuade an investor to come in. That investor needs to take a profit out of this whole process, and if he sees all of he or she sees all of that profit going to the university, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get this away. So make sure that you've got sensible royalty rates and milestones built in, and this is certainly an area where using an experienced lawyer absolutely makes sense, and an experienced lawyer will really help you negotiate at the right sort of license here. So we've talked about writing a business plan, and I know you've got a session on writing a business plan. So this is really just more around the process of doing it. As I say, consult with the tech transfer office, agree an approach. There's no point in writing a business plan that your tech transfer office won't support. Do your research. Learn and understand every single thing about the area that you're going to be in. This is literature, internet, customers, key opinion leaders. You do a lot of research. You fully understand the field that you're in, because when you go out to investors, they're going to expect you to understand. And if they find that you don't understand, you're not a team that they'll invest in. Great idea, team hasn't done their job. So make sure you really understand it. Then you have to pull it together into a really succinct and compelling story. So part of this process is storytelling. You do have to tell a good story that's really well compressed in terms of a business plan. And ultimately, you hone it into this elevator pitch. So the elevator pitch is 2 or 3 sentences that you can say between the first floor and the 6th floor. You know, you're stuck in an elevator with an investor. You know, how do you pitch your business plan in those 2 or 3 statements? Just that succinct summing up of your business. And really be able to do that and make sure that that's the very first thing that goes in your business plan and the very first thing that goes in your presentations. Because you don't want people listening to what you're saying and trying to figure out, what does this business do? You know, I've seen people get 5 or 6 slides into their presentation and the investor still doesn't know what this business does. Make sure that that's something that comes up really right at the beginning. And so there were a whole lot of questions in the previous slides. Just make sure that your business plan answers all of those questions. All of those questions about risk, all of those questions about features and benefits, all of those questions about customers. Make sure that it's all in there. And remember, it's all about the risks. Not just identifying the risks, but what are you going to do about them? What are those contingency plans that you've put in place to address the risks? How are you going to leverage those risks so that as you take the risks out, you generate benefit? Talk about risks. Don't ignore risks. It's a risky business. And find advisors. Find advisors who are going to help you here. Technical experts, key opinion leaders. You know, they may go on to be scientific advisory board members, but also business advisors. If you don't come from a business background, find people that do come from a business background. Find a mentor. You know, you may be able to bring them on at a later stage as a non-executive director, but find these people to use. And at some point along this process, it is worth getting a lawyer involved. If you are disclosing confidential information that isn't, sorry, that hasn't come up quite properly in terms of the placement there, but if you're disclosing confidential information, do decide whether you need a CDA. You won't need one with your lawyers, but you may need your lawyers to put the CDAs in place. This is really to cover you if you're talking about technology that isn't covered by intellectual property. But the key thing here about finding advisors early on is please don't pay for them. Beg, borrow, steal, promise that they'll be involved further down the line. And this, I'm sorry, but this comes for the lawyers as well. You will find lawyers that will do some pro bono early work in terms of getting you set up. You're a startup at this stage. You haven't raised money. Beg, borrow, and steal. That's part of being an entrepreneur. is to beg, borrow, and steal, and do it shamelessly. As I say, the team that I worked with last year were brilliant at it. They were great at getting free advice and free resources. And at some point, you're going to need to form this company. But as I say, not every idea needs a company, and not every company should be established right at the beginning. But I know somebody's going to be talking about starting a company later, so I'm not going to talk any more about that. So I've talked about this elevator pitch, honing it, really understanding it. And one of the ways that I think about this is create a business frame, which is what are the very few things that you will do. We do X. You know, this is the thing that we do. This is how we do it, so that our customers get this benefit, right? It's the thing we do, the way we do it, and the benefit. So make sure that the reason that you're exciting and interesting is part of the elevator pitch. Get that right up there early on. And then the other nice thing about a business frame is it makes sure that you understand what it is you do, but you also understand what you don't do. Everything else is outside of your frame. Just make sure it stays out there. And that's what keeps you focused. Finding investors. I know we're going to have a presentation later about the investors, and Matt's talked quite a lot about this. The good news for you is that finding early seed investment is probably the most difficult form of investment to raise. You'll often hear people saying that you're looking for too little. I do agree with what Matt said. If you can get all of your funding or a good chunk early on, that is absolutely the ideal way. Unfortunately, that can be very difficult. And early on, you may well have a germinal idea that just needs more work before you can really bring an established investor in. And that might be possible through the university. This whole idea of, you know, don't spin out too early. If there's still things that you can do within the university, do it within the university. Your tech transfer office may be able to give some funding. You may be able to get some investment from some seed investment from smaller regional funds or VCTs. But ask yourself, do you really need the funding? Can you continue within the university? Again, beg, borrow, steal. You're entrepreneurs. You know, do it in somebody's kitchen. Do it in somebody's garage. You know, don't spend where you don't have to spend. Maybe you can self-fund if you're really lucky, but maybe you can use friends and family. But be careful again. Remember, contracts are in place for when things go wrong, and friends and family investment can be difficult to manage further down the line. Matt mentioned finding non-dilutive funding, so grants, TSB, MRC, Wellcome Trust, EU, all possible ways of getting funding. Of course, business plan competitions. What a great way to get funding. Win this business plan competition. Angel funding, crowdsourcing. I've never done crowdsourcing. It's relatively new. I have used angel investors. I've been an angel investor myself. It is a way to get early investment, but do be careful. You can create a set of investors, this large, potentially large group of investors, who can then be a barrier to bringing in the investment that you really need. They are going to be diluted out, as Matt said. There's this dilution process. More investment is going to come in. It's going to come in and dilute out those initial investors. And the big VCs are not going to give the angel investors options. They may well give the management team options to keep the management team whole or to keep the management team in a good place. But those angel investors are going to be diluted out. And there are many examples of very successful companies where the angel investors made next to nothing. And so it can be a point of real conflict. So back to Matt's point, if you can get all of your money up front, even if it seems to you like you've got this great big chunk and you're now sitting down at a much smaller percentage, you're probably in a much better position. So if you can get it all up front, do. But you may well have to find other ways to pull together and cobble together investment early on. Prepare and practice your pitch. Please don't make it the first time that you talk about your story when you've actually got an investor in front of you. And you'll have different time periods. Sometimes it will just be that elevator pitch. Sometimes you'll have a half-hour slot. Sometimes you'll have a 1-hour version. Have a different set of slides for different situations. Not all investors are the same. So do your research on your investors as well. Get to understand the investors. What are they looking for? What do they invest in? At what sort of stage do they invest? Do they do early stage investing, or do they only do late stage investing? And when they do invest, how much do they typically invest? So all of these investors will have what we call a sweet spot. Maybe they only do medtech, and they only invest 1 to 2 million in early stage medtech companies, or they tend to want to put 20 million to work in a late stage company. Understand what they invest in, and then understand the people that you're going to talk to. What are their backgrounds? If you're a vaccine company and you're going in, and one of the partners in the VC is a former vaccine executive, expect that person to really understand your technology and have a bunch of difficult questions. Understand what their background is, and work out what else they've invested in. It might seem great that they've invested in a company that's exactly the same as yours and in the same space. They obviously like the area. They've invested here before, but that might be a conflict for them. They've already invested there. They're not going to invest in another competing program. And then just recognize not everyone's going to like you or your idea. So you are going to fail to get through on at least one occasion. And my experience is you're going to fail on far more investment presentations than you'll ever succeed. So back to the point that I was making early on, it's an iterative process. Take every presentation that you do to a potential investor as a learning experience. It's free consultancy. They are experienced people. They see a lot of businesses. They see a lot of deal flow. If they've agreed to see you, they're using a lot of their valuable time just seeing you. Get as much feedback from them as you can. Defend your case, of course, but don't argue with them. It never goes well arguing back with an investor. Listen to what they're saying. If the answer is no, try to find out why not. Not all VCs are good at giving feedback. And there's a vast range from those that will just say no and give you no feedback to those that are really good and will give. And to the VCs, please give feedback. It really helps, even if the answer is no. Give good feedback. And then decide whether you make changes. It is an iterative process, but there needs to be some consistency to what you do. You can't change your story every time you go for an investment pitch. There has to be some consistency to what you're doing as well. And over time, your first few investment pitches, you may change a lot. But over time, you should be getting that pitch and that story more consistent. It can be a really brutal process. It can be a long process. It can sometimes be an insulting process. Investors can seem very, very critical. And that's because they are. That's part of their job. Their job is to find the weaknesses in your plan. Their job is to try and kick all of those potential problems and understand where everything can go wrong. It's all about risk. Their job is to find out, part of their job, are you a strong team? And they may well come back and say, we really like this idea, but X, Y, and Z on the team just they're not gonna hack it. That might be part of the feedback. And actually, if that's real feedback, as I say, listen, take it on board. It can seem really brutal, but learn from every criticism. As I say, every meeting is a free consultation. Don't give up too early. You will have to kiss a lot of frogs, and some of them are toads. The first company that we set up, as I said, was a spin-out company. We did roadshows around all of the UK and European VCs. We did a East Coast US road trip. We did a West Coast road trip. 12 months later, I'd nearly run out of personal cash. I wasn't earning during that time. And right towards the end of that process, we found a lead investor who pulled together a syndicate. We managed to get 20 million invested. We ran the company for 3 years, and we sold it to Pfizer for more than 10 times the investment. So from the discounted cash flow point of view, it was a very successful process. But setting up that company, and that was our first time. That was our first rodeo as a team. Getting the funding was a 1-year process. So you do need some patience there. The process is costly and time-consuming from the investor point of view as well. If they really start if they get beyond the dating game and they really start to pull together a syndicate, pull together term sheets, do their detailed due diligence, they're starting to spend time and money. Their opportunity cost clock is ticking. So do recognize that this is actually going to be quite an all-consuming process on both sides for a while. Detailed due diligence is going to look at your technology, the IP, legals, so back to that contract that you have with the tech transfer office, your staffing, the market, your plans, and ultimately this will move to full legals that you're going to hear about later. There are a few, something's fallen off the bottom there. There are a few just important concepts that you should pick up. Hopefully they'll come out along the way. Matt was throwing around terms like pre and post money valuation and dilution. Understand how that works, what pre-money valuation is and post-money valuation. Dragon's Den is not a good learning method for how you negotiate investment and dilution. Really understand what it means. Understand this issue of share options versus equity and what the difference is and why it's important and how you can use it. And then understand the issue of ordinary shares versus preference shares. I'm not going to go into the details. I think they may come out in the later presentations, but there are things that you need to understand about legal contracts and setting up a business that will make a difference to you in particular in the long run. So just to finish off a few other observations, I guess, in terms of starting up. As I've said from the beginning and throughout, it's an iterative process. So you do have to iterate. You iterate through the whole life cycle of this process, but you're also expected to be constant. And so as much as possible, you need to keep a steady ship. So learn, but as much as possible, you need to manage in the direction that you've told everybody you're going to manage. If your business plan said you're going to do X, Y, and Z, you need to do everything in your plan to deliver X, Y, and Z. If you said Z was going to happen by December of this year, try and make sure that Z happens at December of this year. The more you stick to your plan, the more confidence your investors have in you, the better your team is perceived, and the better chance you have of the further investment further down the line. So learn and iterate, but also be constant. Tell a story, but never lie. So you are a storyteller. You've got to try and tell people how your great technology is going to solve a problem. You're going to tell people how you're going to go from having absolutely no resources to having an organization that can deliver a phase 2 clinical trial. You're going to have to talk about how this business grows, but you must never lie. If there are issues in the cupboard, they have to come out. As I say, don't ignore the risks. The risks are part of the process. Identify the risks and tell people how you're going to deal with them. And even though you've identified the risks, things are going to go wrong. Things always go wrong. So deal with them and learn. And as Matt said, as much as possible, have contingency plans in place to deal with them. Yes, you do need to know the numbers. Okay, so for those of you who got completely lost by Matt's presentation, don't worry too much about the detail of how a discounted cash flow works. Because as Matt says, that is a model that is actually tends to be used later in the process. But you do need to know your own numbers. You do need to know what your projected market size is. You do need to know how much it's likely to cost you to get to the end of phase 1 clinical trials. You do need to know how many months it will take to get a GMP manufactured material. So you need to know all of the numbers in your business plan, whether they're financial numbers or planning numbers. And you need to understand how all of that works. And you need to know that before you present to a potential investor, because they're going to want to know that you understand all of those things. So this is a phrase I like. You need to be able to see the wood and the trees. This whole idea that you can go from the top level vision of where you're going and zoom into the detail when you need to zoom into the detail. Deal with the detail, but always keep that vision of where things are going ultimately. I find this sometimes is an issue here in the UK. Don't be parochial. The world is much bigger than the UK and the NHS. There might be business proposals that are NHS specific and UK specific, but most of your proposals aren't. And NICE is important within the world, but it isn't the only payer system. So do make sure that if your proposal is a global product, you don't get stuck in UK thinking. Markets can be very different around the world, and come out of the UK bubble if you're working on a global idea. I've said this a lot. Beg, borrow, steal. When you're in a startup, make every pound stretch until it screams. You do need to run a tight ship. You're not going to have any corporate art or a corporate fountain at this sort of stage. But also remember that you're investing and not spending. Okay? Don't skimp on things that are important. This isn't when you have this investor money. You are then investing that on behalf of that investor into your program, and you need to do the right things to the right sort of quality. So skimping is not a good form of investing. So again, it's counterbalancing those two things. It's finding the right balance. How do we save money, but how do we spend it on the right things in the right sort of way? Network. This is a great opportunity to meet lots of people. Don't stop meeting people. Keep your networks going. Every investor that you meet, even if they say no, is part of your network. Everybody that you ever meet is potentially useful along the way. So make sure that you really build those networks and surround yourself with good people in your team, as advisors, as mentors, as investors. This is all about people. Really make sure that you're always working with good people. Prepare to work harder than you've ever worked before. If you're in a startup, when you wake up in the morning. You're in a startup the whole way through the day. You're definitely still in a startup when you're desperately trying to get to sleep, because it's your startup that stops you from getting to sleep. You're going to dream about the startup, and you're going to wake up the next morning with it again. So it does consume your life. It's good. Be strong and fearless, but enjoy the ride. I've loved all of the startup work that I've done. It is enjoyable. It is a roller coaster. But make sure you enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, then it's probably not for you.